today?
Good. How are you, Brandon?
I'm pretty good. It's really good to see you here. So I know you served in the Coast Guard for a while. When did you join the service and how old were you?
I joined October 9th of 2001 and I was 20 years old.
So why did you enlist in the Coast Guard?
So at the time you weren't allowed to stay on your parents' insurance unless you were enrolled full-time in college, and college wasn't working out very well for me. And my dad was like, you need a job with insurance. And I was a lifeguard at the time. And I was just driving down McKnight Road one day and I saw this Coast Guard recruiter and I was like, oh, I wonder what this is. And I walked in and the guy handed me a sheet and he was like, here's a couple magazines, like, this is what we do. And, if you want to do it, let me know. If not, I don't give a shit what you do. And I was like, okay. And just reading about them, and they did search and rescue and law enforcement. And even though they're a military service, they had more of this like humanitarian aspect. So I went in, and next thing I knew, I was signing up. I was supposed to leave for boot camp later, but then 9/11 happened and they moved up my ship out date to October.
Did you come from a military family at all, or were you the first of your family?
Both of my grandfathers were in the Army during World War II. My uncle served in the Army during Vietnam. But I'm the first one since my uncle to join.
Awesome. There you go. I mean, so did you like going to basic? What was the things that you kind of liked when you were there, when you first started out?
Nothing. It is absolutely hell on earth. And it wasn't until like you get to your first unit that you realize everything that you went through, everybody at your unit went through the same thing. And it was like, once I got to my first unit, there was just like an instant family. Everybody knew exactly what you went through, and now we laugh about it.
Was there one person that can really stick out to you when you think back to that time that helped you through?
So I'm Greek Orthodox, and on Sunday mornings, we had like free time and you could go to the chapel on base, but there was an Orthodox church not far from base. So I was allowed to go off base every week and attend church services, and that being able to kind of get away from it every week, and the response that I got just walking into the church, and everybody was just so proud to have me there. And I think even just maybe going to the chapel on base, I don't know that it would have been enough. Like, that was my first time away from home, other than driving down to the beach for a couple days. And you get there and your whole world is completely rocked. You are thrown into something that you've never experienced. Nobody can ever prepare you for that first day, especially. And then the rest of it, it's just like the first, at least half of it, you feel completely inadequate, and they're always yelling at you, and you're always doing push-ups or doing something because somebody, probably me, was not marching correctly. And then at the end, it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I did this. And okay, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And then after you graduate, your company commanders tell you that every single time we were out in the parade field doing whatever, push-ups, jumping jacks, running back and forth, it was all planned. And those are things that, now I'm able to tell somebody, like, when your brother was going to boot camp, and I was like, listen, I know how you are. Let me explain this to you. Don't, everything's planned. We spent hours on the beach one night with our rifles and just doing ridiculous stuff that we thought, like, how? how can they do this to us? And then at the end, they're like, ha ha ha, it was planned.
Did you ever get used to that kind of planning lifestyle rather than everything being, did you ever get used to that planning lifestyle?
Yes, it's like it's part of me now. Like I'm totally capable of having a day where I have nothing planned, but if I'm doing something, I want it planned. I'm always 15 minutes early. And my daughter is a putz, and it drives me crazy because the amount of times that I've been late to things because she can't get it together, it like hurts my soul sometimes.
Now, what was your job in the military? What did you do?
So I was a bosun's mate. And when I first um, started as a bosun's mate, we really drove the boats, like the small boats and stuff. We navigated as well, but on the ships they had quartermasters, and they were the ones that would do more of the navigation, while the bosun's mates were the ones that would steer the boats and everything. And then they combined our ratings, and I ended up at a law enforcement unit. So I was still on the boats, but we did a lot more training towards the anti-encounter terrorism, anti-encounter immigration, narcotics, things like that.
Was it something that you like to do?
Oh, I loved it. It was fun. And, everybody that I was stationed with, I mean, I still have friends that, we talk pretty regularly. There's a large group of people that I know if something happens, they're a phone call away, and they will do whatever it is they can for me and I for them.
Now, do you remember your first time coming home? Was it hard for you to adjust afterwards?
So the first time I came home was right after boot camp. And I think the biggest adjustment was not being watched all the time. In boot camp, it was everything. You knew somebody was watching because every single time something happened, it was like, oh, well, we're going to end up out in the parade field. And, coming home and like, it was weird just because I was so used to having to watch everything I did, everything you said. Like, you didn't really speak unless you were spoken to, if you were outside the barracks. And I remember my dad when I got home, and it was like the first time I'd ever called him sir. And he said something. He was like, "You've never called me sir ever." And I'm like, "Well, because you're my dad." But it was a habit. Everybody was sir, everybody was ma'am. And that's just how it was. And then I was stationed up in Erie for the first year and a half. So it wasn't that different than being down here. And once I got acclimated into the unit and everything, you start to relax a little bit and realize nobody's going to make you do push-ups for not doing exactly what they wanted you to do at the proper moment.
Now, what did you find challenging? Was it the aspect of having everything ordered, or what was the most challenging thing for you?
The most challenging thing. Well, in the beginning, it was shooting. We did I don't even think they do it anymore in boot camp, but we had like 2 or 3 range days, and most of us had never had a live firearm in our hands before. And I remember shaking like my entire body. I think out of the probably 20 or 25 rounds we were supposed to shoot, I put maybe 3 on the target. And I was crying and I'm shaking. And then, and I wasn't the only one like that. And then when I got to my first unit, every 6 months we had to go to the range and qualify so we could be on the boarding team. And we had these range instructors that came down from Buffalo. And the first day at the range, it was very similar. I didn't cry this time, but I was shaking. And we got back to the station that night and they're like, what is it? And I was like flipped out, like, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know why I'm doing this. And they sat down with me and we went through everything. And as I got more comfortable handling the firearms unloaded, I ended up qualifying by the end of the week. So I would say that is probably the most challenging thing that I did while I was in service.
Do you have a really good or maybe a fun memory of your service time?
Wow, there's a lot. um so once I left Erie, I went down to Chesapeake, Virginia, which is right outside of Virginia Beach. And I was originally at a maritime safety and security team. And we combined with the tactical law enforcement team and we created the first special forces unit of the Coast Guard, the Maritime Security Response Team. And a lot of it was, they were like, hey, this is what you need to do. And we go, okay, well, what about this? And the commanding officer was just like, well, nobody told you no. And we're like, okay. So we just got to a point where they would tell us like, this is what we needed to figure out. We would go do it. And then we'd say, hey, this is what works. And we were officially commissioned in May of 2006. So in May of 2016, they invited us all back for like a reunion and to see where the unit was. And to see them doing the things that we thought were an absolute cluster. Everything we did, we were like just flying by the seat of our pants the majority of the time. And we were like, we don't know how this is going to work. And let's hope nobody gets hurt this time. But to go back and, I mean, number one, see a lot of these people that I hadn't seen in 10 years, but to see the current members using the things that we wrote procedures for and that we tried out and we're like, hey, this works, this doesn't. That's my fondest memory. That is probably, yeah.
So what were some of the things that actually you guys ended up writing out and doing for the future servicemen?
So just like our tactics and operating procedures, and like we did a lot of training, and they would always try to tell us that this was an operation. Like we would all get recalled and we'd all meet at the base and we'd pack up and go to where it was that we were supposed to go. And the first time they did it, so I was the chart and publications petty officer. So when we were going to a new operation area, I ordered the charts, I corrected them, so we knew where we could take the boats. And I don't know, maybe a month or so beforehand, I get these charts that I didn't order, and they're like, you need to correct these. And they were for this little town in North Carolina. And I'm like, we don't even know what's here. And this is before like Google was really big, and like we still had dial-up internet. So it wasn't, a lot of time, like we weren't Googling things because that's just not what we did. And one of the guys was from like around that area. And I was like, where is this place? What is it? And he's like, oh, this is like the most country backwards little town on the planet. There's a ferry station, which nobody's entirely sure why. And this little like rundown motel, it actually had one stoplight. And I'm like, all right, well, whatever. I got to correct these charts. So we end up getting recalled and we're going through all of this. And they're like, we're going to Sarah, North Carolina. And I'm like, okay, well, those are all the charts that I corrected. And this is an operation. We have intel that this ferry is being taken over by terrorists, blah, blah, whatever. So we all kind of like had our suspicions, but we're like, okay, this is cool. This is what we trained for. And as we're driving into this little town in North Carolina, we see this huge sign that says, welcome Coast Guard. We all stopped, like, and we're like, this isn't a real operation. This is a training mission. And we get there and, we go into our meeting and everything. And we're like, listen, we're not stupid. And the commanding officer was like, all right, well, we tried. You're right. It is training, but this is the closest thing to real life that we can do right now. And it ended up that the seas were terrible. The weather was terrible. It was pouring down rain. It was such high winds. And it ended up being one of the best training missions that we did because, it wasn't most of the time when we went out and did training, it was like, oh, well, it's going to be a nice day. Let's go do some training. So we were able to do these things in, weather that we weren't used to. And it really ended up being a great experience.
So this is kind of a random question though, but when you were on the boat, did you ever get like seasick at all?
I didn't, thankfully. When I went overseas, I was on a 110-foot patrol boat, and I was kind of worried because not only was I part of the navigation crew, I was the medic on board, and I was a gunner. And I'd never been on a boat that big. I was always on these, like, I think the biggest boat I was on before I reported down there was a 47-foot boat. And we went out the first time. We did all of our training in Portsmouth, and we had maybe 2 or 3 weeks of the first part of the training where we had our boats, but they were being shipped over to the Middle East. So they would be there when we got there. So we didn't really do much here in the States. And then we got there and we had, it was probably close to a day from where our boats were to where we got to our operation area. And I was pretty nervous at first, but it was kind of soothing. I got to be in my bed, and I mean, I can sleep anywhere, so it wasn't, but there were a couple people on board that they got sick pretty instantly, and I felt bad, but thankfully it was me.
Did you find it at all scary to be just out there in the middle of the ocean?
Not really. It was very calming and peaceful when you weren't thinking about why you were there and what you were doing. And even then, even most of the time when we were in the operation area, we inspected the boats that were taking crews to and from the oil platform, and nobody tried to come in to the operation area that wasn't allowed. So thankfully, while I was there, we didn't have any of those issues. But I think a lot of it was too that we, like, looking back on it now, I think deep down we knew the kind of danger that we were in, but we were all there together. We all looked out for each other. So it made it incredibly less stressful. But now I'm kind of like, oh, well, I probably should have maybe felt a little more stressed or scared than I did at the time. But I was also in my early 20s and I was invincible then.
Do you think that, being in the military actually helped you become a medic now, or being an EMT now?
Yes. So I randomly got selected to go to school to be a basic EMT, because the unit that we ended up combining with had 12 spots in this one class, and 6 of the guys that were supposed to go were deployed. So they were like, hey, does anybody want to go? We are like, these spots are paid for. And I was like, yeah, I'll go. So there were 6 people from my unit and 6 people from their unit that went. And we had an agreement with one of the local EMS services that, like, we could go and volunteer, and we didn't have to go to the office that day, but we deployed so consistently, like, we couldn't really give them consistent days. Like, I couldn't say, oh, I'll be here every Tuesday, but they were pretty good about it. So I was able to do like a couple shifts, but then between our training schedule and our deployment schedule, I didn't really do too much down there. And then when I got out of the Coast Guard, I wanted to go to medic class. And it took me about 2 years before I found a medic class. Like it, you know, Google was a little bit better when I got out than when I first went in, but it took me a long time to find it. And then I was at my friend's house for, I think, like a birthday party or something. And I was talking to one of her friends about, like, oh yeah, I was thinking about going to paramedic school. And he was like, oh, well, here, Google this, go here. This is where I went years ago before I became a lawyer. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's how I ended up finding my program. I did that for a very long time.
What year was that?
Let's see, I got out in 2006. So it was 2008, and I graduated in 2009 from medic school.
And have you been at sorry, this is kind of going more towards your life than anything right now. Or have you been at Shaler EMS ever since?
So I did a year at Northwest EMS, which services like Kennedy, Stowe, McKees Rocks, Bellevue, Avalon. And then I started at Shaler, well, it was Shaler EMS at the time, in April of 2010. And then we were only servicing Shaler Township. And then we started servicing Etna and Hampton. So it's now Shaler Hampton EMS. And I was there, well, I'm still technically there. I went to nursing school and I pick up shifts every once in a while still. I think it's just ingrained and it's in my blood. I don't think I can ever fully give it up.
So you said you went to medic school now. So besides Shaler EMS, where else do you work?
So my first job as a nurse was at UPMC Passavant on a surgical oncology unit. And then I just started working at the VA in Oakland, like the middle of January.
So going back to the military though, would you recommend it, or rather, would you do it all over again if you could?
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
The camaraderie and, just having those, I mean, I still have a lot of those relationships. And the one thing that I wish was just everywhere was every time we were told to do something, we just did it. We did it well. We did it well the first time. And that's the one thing I think that was probably the most difficult for me in the civilian world, working and everything, was, my boss telling me something like, hey, this needs done. Okay. And you just go and do it. But then those that weren't in the military they start complaining about it. Well, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? And the amount of times that I've actually looked somebody in the eye and been like, if you would have just done it, it would have been done. And the amount of time that you've been standing here complaining about it, you could have been done. So, yeah, that's my biggest pet peeve.
That kind of leads into my next question. Would you recommend that to younger people to join the military?
I would. Looking back at who I was when I joined the military, and who I was when I came out, and even who I am now, I wouldn't be where I am without that structure. And really, they taught me how to be an adult. Like, not that my parents didn't teach me life lessons or anything, but it really instilled this, I don't know, like this drive that I didn't have then. And, I had some friends that actually, I don't even know where they're at now, but I think I kind of saw myself going down a path that I didn't want to. And, my dad was, well, you need health insurance, you need health insurance. So that was a big thing back then. And I was kind of like, well, the full-time jobs with health insurance. Like, I don't even know what it was that I wanted to do in order to be able to have that full-time job. So yeah.
How has the military changed through from now to when you served?
Um, so I have one of my best friends she was a recruiter for a couple years, and she's actually getting ready to retire. And there was, while she was a recruiter, I called her and I was like, what do I have to do to get back in? Like, even just the reserves, like 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks out of the year, I get to drive boats and shoot guns again. I'll take it. And she's like, don't do it. She's like, it's not the Coast Guard that we were in. And she said she would have gotten out if she wasn't so close to retirement. And she said it's just not as structured, I guess, as whenever we were in. And there was a lot more, I don't even know like what word to use. Like, it was, when we were told to do something, we just did it. And it was, she said there's a lot more pushback, and, more people have opinions, and the things that because I want to say she was the commanding officer of like a small unit at the time. And I'm sorry, she was going there. She was a recruiter at the time. And then but they were also there were all the military cutbacks. So they weren't allowing a lot of people in. And she's like, we're disqualifying great people for stupid things. And then it was a couple years later that I'd said something to her again. And then that's when she was the commanding officer of a small unit. And she's like, if I'd have known that this is what I would have had to deal with, I wouldn't have put in for this station. And she's like, it's just not what I remember and what I loved. And she's like, you'd have probably gotten kicked out by now for your mouth anyways. So
Is that sad for you to hear?
it is. But I see, like, the unit that we were at in Virginia, I see them still doing great things. And, whenever I follow a bunch of Coast Guard things on Facebook, and there's a lot of it that, like, I see they're still doing the mission. And as long as that's happening, it doesn't really matter what happens day to day on base. It's, can you go out there and can you fulfill the mission of the Coast Guard?
So you talked about how there's a lot of pushback lately between the military and people that are in it. How do you think we can bridge the military and civilian divide that's kind of going on?
That's a good question. I know you kind of don't, it's there, it's kind of the same thing. Like, everybody's raised differently. And, a lot of who I was back then was partly how I was raised. And once I went to boot camp and saw like the structure and things, like, I was able to see more of like the values and ideals that my family had. But bridging the military and civilian gap, I don't think is possible. Like, it's a whole mindset that I'm seeing now as people, as like, even my daughter's 15, like her generation, they don't want to be told what to do. They want to have their voice. They want to, they want to do things their own way, which is respectable, but it's difficult sometimes to even just give advice. She's a hormonal teenager, so that's part of it too. But it's that, like, even talking to some of her friends, or the things that she tells me, like, that happen in school. And even when I was in school, like, if some of the things that go on, I'm like, we would have ended up in detention, or in the principal's office, And it's not something that you can't force everybody to sign up for a couple years when they graduate high school. Like, I also don't think that that's right. The military was right for me, but it's not right for everybody.
And what do you think that people can learn from the veterans that are out here now, including yourself, from all their experiences over the years?
I think more mental health, um, having being able to talk to somebody about those stressful situations. And, now working at the VA, a lot of my patients are Vietnam veterans. They're from the Vietnam War, the Korean War. And, I've had several even from Desert Storm, and seeing their underlying mental health issues, I think that, you know, that's the biggest thing, that when you're looking at a veteran, now, not everybody was in combat. I wasn't in combat. I was on a boat. I did security on the oil platforms. But even my experiences being in a Middle Eastern country they're always there. It's something kind of in the back of my mind that, I think about when I was there and the people that I was there with, and knowing that, like, there years, I don't know how many years ago, I was in downtown Pittsburgh, and this guy was just like walking down the sidewalk screaming, like, help me, I need money, I'm a veteran. And he was like getting in people's faces. And the thing is, like, he had some ridiculously traumatic experience that he was never able to deal with. And I think, just if you know somebody is a veteran, there's always some underlying crazy stressful situation that they went through that you could probably not even believe, And I, now working with the veterans regularly, I'm starting to see that, and, having them kind of tell me even bits and pieces, like my uncle was in Vietnam, and over the years, he's always told us little bits and pieces of when he was over there. And it wasn't until recently that I even knew he was in combat. And it's like, I think it's something, especially being in combat, especially during the Vietnam War, there was so much backlash from the war itself, that it was something that they just held in and never told anybody, because, a lot of them didn't even say that they were in the military at that time.
Do you think having the mental health aspects now in our society is going to help the future veterans?
Yeah, I know we have I'm trying to think. We have like the inpatient unit at the VA in Pittsburgh, and then there's also inpatient units at the one in Aspinwall. And I think that it's something, especially since, you know, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and, people started coming back from that I see a lot more patients that have psychiatric help, that they have a psychiatric consult. And I think it is getting better. But part of the problem is, like, as a veteran, I didn't know when I first got out, that I just still had health insurance through the VA. It was something that I had no clue about. And at the time, it was only supposed to be for 5 years. And then I think they started to see all of these mental health issues with people that were over in that served during the Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. So they ended up just extending it, that basically if you served after 9/11, you have health benefits through the VA. And I think that it's something too, like, even with my uncle, he got all of his care at the VA. And it was something that I don't even know how he found out about it, but he ended up, but there, I don't know if he had mental health issues that were taken care of, but he had nothing but good things to say about it. And I think it's more of a, the veterans need to know when they're being discharged, they need to know that this is something for them. Like every time I see a homeless veteran, I'm like, why don't you just go to the VA hospital? Like just walk in and talk to them, because they're going to be able to help you to some extent. Um, so yeah, so if I meet veterans, I'm usually tell them like, hey, you can get at least health benefits from the VA.
Now, working with these veterans, does that make you more, are you more empathetic now since you can relate to them?
Yeah, I definitely enjoy working with them more than I did um, at the previous hospital. And I think it's part of it that I know what they went through. And, usually just talking there, because we're allowed to wear like military shirts and stuff with our scrubs. And I usually have a Coast Guard shirt on. And most of the time the patients are like, oh, Coast Guard. I'm like, yeah, I was in the Coast Guard. And it just kind of almost instantly, even though they were a Marine or in the Air Force or in the Army, it doesn't matter. We all went through boot camp, and it always seems to kind of make them relax just a little bit, like knowing, oh, well, you're a veteran too. And I can definitely be empathetic to all of their, well, not all of their concerns, but
What is the one thing that you will forever hold with you from your time in the military?
one thing. Just the camaraderie and the brother and sisterhood. And, being a woman in a man's world was very difficult at first, but anytime not even that it was an issue, it was, I deep down felt like I had to prove myself more because I was a woman, but none of the men that I served with thought that. And it was something years afterwards. My one friend lives down in St. Pete, and I went down and we were visiting, and I told him that. And he just looked at me and he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I had to prove myself way more than any of you ever did. And he was like, no, you didn't. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, Maria, he's like, you ended up on the teams because everybody respected you and you did what we were doing. There was no difference at that unit between our physical standards. Like I had to run the 1.5 miles in 12 minutes, just like the guys did. I had to do the same amount of sit-ups and the same there. Where in the rest of the Coast Guard, like in my first unit, I had more time for my run. I had to do less push-ups and less sit-ups. And he was like, you passed all those physical requirements just like we did. Everything we did, you were right there with us. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. I just always felt like I was working harder. And he was like, well, you never had to. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. Great to know that 15 years later, but I wouldn't change it for the world, because like I am who I am because of those experiences. And apparently it was all in my head.
So you felt like people looked down on you?
No, I wouldn't say look down on me. I think that it was just kind of, when I got there, I was the first deployable female, and it was something that they weren't used to. And I don't even want to say that I felt like I was working harder. I felt that I had to prove myself day in and day out all the time, where it seemed like they could slack off for a day or a week. And, but if I did that, it would be like, oh, Maria's not going to be on the team anymore. And it wasn't like that. Like 20, 21 years old. Like, and it was basically in my head. I felt that way because I was a woman in a man's world, and I had to run just as fast as them if I wanted to stay. And I had to do all this. I had to be as good or better than them to earn my place. But they all felt the same way. It wasn't, any guy coming into the unit had to do the same thing. You had to be as good as or better as the person next to you. Otherwise, what we were doing wasn't a place for you. And yeah, after 15 years, he explained that to me, and he was like, it was the same for the rest of us. I was like, oh, well, that's good. Okay.
All right, Maria, thank you so much for your time for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to do it.